It just takes a couple of minutes, Erica. It just all says all joining for them. We'll just give it about 30 seconds. I think it's just loading for all of them.
Great.
Yep. Excellent. Okay. I think we're good right now. We can do have 56 so far participants. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. My name is Maha Ayub. I am from the Dearborn Adult and Community Ed. I'm the assistant supervisor. And welcome to the McKay Fall Conference, Renewing, Recharging, and Rebuilding. Again, another virtual platform for our conference. So thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much for attending this session with our, the famous Miss Erica Luce, Sue Johnson, and Matt Shields, measuring performance under WIOA. Just a few items for everyone that's coming today. Any questions that you may have, please, if you can leave that in the chat. I will be watching the Zoom chat and the HOVA chat. So I have both platforms open. And at the end, I'm sure they would leave, the panelists would leave some time for questions for Q&A. If you can leave any questions till the end, please, because they have a lot of content to cover. And we all want to just make sure that we go through that without interruptions. If you have any questions, type it in the chat, send me a private question if you want me to stop for something, technical difficulties. Tonight we have our animal trivia, and I know Sue has big plans for that and her team. So if you attended yesterday's bingo, I am terrible at bingo and I have to make an admission. I actually was cheating. My son was next to me and he said, Mama, you came down to that level, you cheating at bingo. And I gave up because it was all these songs. I am a death metal fan. So this was way too, it wasn't in my area. So I stopped at the second song. It was awesome. It was nice to see everyone. We just hope that you join us today. Again, we're trying to build the community with this. If you can keep your cameras on, with being virtual, it's just not easy, but we just want to make sure that we see everyone, we connect with everyone, and, in hopes of coming back to being in person one day. If you're looking for any sketches, tomorrow, please check your email. I think it says around noonish, they will be sending something with a survey. Go ahead and fill those out tomorrow. And engage in the HOVA app with the community with questions. I've been seeing a lot of chat today. Again, it's just a way of us building community. I always go off script from what I have to read because I feel like, this is about time. Let's make this engaging. Let's just make this nice and fun. This presentation is about more information. Like I said, we'll give time at the end. I'll read the questions to Erica and the team. So I give it to Erica right now.
All right. Thank you so much, Maha. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session, Measuring Performance under WIOA. My name is Erica Luce, and I'm the manager of the Office of Adult Education within the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, or LEO, as you may be more familiar. And I'm so glad to be joined this afternoon with two true experts when it comes to measuring performance under WIOA, and that is Matt Shields, the manager of the Data and Performance Reporting section, and Sue Johnson, a data specialist from that Data and Performance Reporting section. You probably know Sue better as the Mayor's Queen, as most often she is called by folks in the field. And so you'll be hearing from Matt and Sue shortly, but I just wanted to start out and thank everyone for being here. As we were putting this presentation together and preparing for our session, I learned a lot, going through this material, and I hope that each of you have the same experience as well. As we continue to focus on how we can partner and coordinate services across the core programs under WIOA, it's so important that we truly understand each of these programs, and how they're measured and valued or evaluated, I should say. But over the last few years, I know I've heard multiple times from adult educators across the state, saying that they've run into roadblocks with discussions with their one-stop partners, whether it's co-enrolling participants or specific services. And I think if we take a step back to truly understand not only the services that each core program offers, but also, the completion and performance targets for these programs, I think that we can better understand them and then more strategically, think about how to best prepare our students to be successful across all programs that they can benefit from and may need to participate in. And so this really is not about creaming or only serving participants that will meet performance, but it's just a true understanding of the other programs within the workforce system and how they operate and how we can all work together. So as Maha said, we do have a very full agenda. And so I appreciate, putting any questions in the chat. We want to make sure and get to those. And so we do have time at the end. but I want to jump right in. And so with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Matt to kick us off on the discussion around WIOA's Titles 1 and 3.
Thanks, Erica. As Erica mentioned, my name is Matt Shields. I'm the manager for data and performance reporting for the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, Office of Employment and Training. This afternoon, I'm going to kick things off with some basic information about the WIOA indicators of performance, and then I'll walk through how Michigan arrives at its target performance levels for Titles 1 and 3. And then I'll turn things back over to Erica and Sue to talk about Title II. So let's start out with the law and the requirement. Section 116 of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act establishes common performance measures for all of the core programs. Today we'll talk about Title I, which includes the WIOA Adult, Dislocated Worker, and Youth programs. Title II, the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, and Title III, the Employment Services Program under the Wagner-Peiser Act. We're not going to cover the vocational rehabilitation program today. So there are 6 primary indicators of performance: employment rate, second and fourth quarters after exit, median earnings, which is measured the second quarter after exit, credential attainment rate, measuring credentials attained during participation or within 1 year of exit, measurable skill gains, measuring the gains attained during program participation, and then finally, effectiveness in serving employers. This is still a pilot measure, so there aren't any targets established for serving employers. So for today's purposes, we'll focus on the first 5 measures where there are targets, and we'll talk about how those targets are negotiated. On the Title I and III side of things, we've devoted entire days of training to the details, the definitions, the calculations, that go into those 5 participant-focused measures. So today, we'll kind of assume that you have a basic understanding of these measures. And what we really want to focus on is how the state, the federal agencies, and the local areas come to agreement on target performance levels. So what does that negotiation process look like for Titles I and III? Again, we'll start with the requirements. The Department of Labor, Office of Employment and Training, or ETA, provides guidance on the negotiation process. That guidance comes in the form of a Training and Employment Guidance Letter, or TEGL. And then it's TEGL 1119 is the one that focuses on this. TEGL 1119 outlines our requirements to negotiate target levels of performance with ETA's regional office. In Michigan's case, that's Region 5 out of Chicago. It also provides guidance for how Michigan must negotiate individual target performance levels with the local workforce boards or our Michigan Works agencies. Negotiations occur every 2 years, and they align with the timelines established for submitting our unified state plan and the required 2-year modification to that state plan as well. In Michigan, we start with proposing our expected levels of performance in our draft state plan, and really that's true for all states. Then DOL Region 5 will schedule a negotiation session with us. We have to agree on target performance levels with DOL and then submit a revised state plan by June 30th of each year that we do negotiations. Once the state level targets are agreed to, Michigan then has until September 30th to agree to targets with each of the 16 Michigan Works agencies. So as we go through our negotiation process with DOL, we have to take into account 4 factors when we propose our expected levels of performance. We look at comparisons to the negotiated levels of other states. We have to take a look at estimated performance using a statistical adjustment model that DOL provides. And I'll talk a little bit more about the statistical adjustment model at the end. We have to consider continuous improvement. And then we also have to align with the Government Performance and Results Act, or GPRA, targets that are established. So our starting point in Michigan was to take a look at DOL's 4 factors, and we converted them to specific data that we had access to and that we could replicate each year that we had to do performance negotiations. We use a simple average across these 8 factors to calculate what we considered to be a realistic target for each of our performance measures. For Titles 1 and 3, Michigan consistently outperforms many other states across the region and the nation. So if you look at that list of 8 factors, we intentionally included 5 different factors related to other states' performance in an attempt to sort of level the playing field a little bit and bring our targets into alignment with where other states across the nation targets would lie. So once we went through all of those calculations, we came up with the perfect target level of performance. Then we had to do a reality check. In many cases, Michigan was already meeting or exceeding the calculated targets that we came up with. And that didn't really pass the eyeball test. And we knew the Department of Labor would never let us negotiate our rates down from previous years. So we compared the calculated target rates that we came up with to 3 key areas that we knew Department of Labor would put added emphasis around. We used this comparison to propose expected levels of performance that still demonstrated goals for continuous improvement. We either looked for slight increases to previous targets, or within the plans, we talked about focusing on harder to serve populations. So really looking at how could we have continuous improvement without constantly increasing our target rates. Even through all that work, the negotiation process with Department of Labor was still painful. They challenged us to higher performance levels, but the detail behind all of our calculations, all of our target levels that we came up with, gave us a lot of ammunition to push back in areas where Michigan, we felt Michigan was being held to a significantly higher level than our neighboring states. In the end, this slide demonstrates the result of our last negotiation process across Titles 1 and 3, looking at the target factors for PY 20 and 21. As you look at these numbers, you'll see that employment targets and credential attainment targets are fairly consistent across the programs. We do negotiate levels down lower around our youth program, where it's typically harder to achieve outcomes within that program. And then again, in the Wagner-Pizer program, where services are more limited, Wagner-Pizer is really our universal employment program, where anyone looking for assistance would come into a Michigan Work Service Center. And really the workforce staff has more limited ability to impact those employment outcomes when they're serving such a large number under that program. You may notice as you look at these numbers that the measurable skill gains targets are significantly lower than what you will see on the adult education slides later on this afternoon. This is because measurable skill gains are really a new process for Titles 1 and 3. These are measurements on active participants, which typically is not the way that performance is done at within those two titles. And so we're still experiencing kind of some growth in that area as our Michigan Works agencies really embrace that new performance measure. So that's kind of the process that we go through at the state level to get to what our state targets are. We follow a pretty similar process when we go through and do our negotiations with the 16 Michigan Works agencies. So again, the timeline for that is we complete our negotiations with Department of Labor by June 30th of the year. Then we have 3 months after that to complete negotiations with all 16 of the Michigan Works agencies. We use a similar process. In this case, we use 6 factors as we calculate performance targets for those Michigan Works agencies. Here you can see that we really try to focus on the actual historical performance for the Michigan Works agencies. We don't want to set those local areas up for failure. We want something that's reasonable as we go through this negotiation process. On the local side of things, instead of asking the Michigan Works agencies to propose targets to us at the state level, when we go through the local negotiation process, the state proposes the targets to those Michigan Works agencies. We do this primarily to ensure that the combination of all 16 Michigan Works agencies' performance will contribute to and allow the state to meet its final targets. We do a lot of calculations behind the scenes to understand where those targets come in, how they can combine, and to make sure that we're on track to meet our targets. We do allow the MWAs to submit counter proposals for each individual measure. And as we go through this process, probably anywhere between 50 and 75% of the targets can be agreed to between the state and the Michigan Works agencies, either through our proposed targets to them or through that counter proposal process. This really eases the burden of negotiating so many different performance measures with 16 different MWAs. If we can narrow it down to about 25% of those targets that we actually need to have conversations around, it really helps us accelerate this process. We do schedule negotiation meetings with the Michigan Works agencies within that 3-month period to resolve anything that either the MWA or the state can't agree to through that proposed target and counter proposal process. So to help make this easier as we go through the negotiation process with the Michigan Works agencies, we've created a tool that we can use as we have discussions. We use this as well as we're going through and reviewing counter proposals. But basically it outlines all of the details that go into that initial proposed target that we submit to the Michigan Works agencies. And as we're on the phone or in a conference room with staff from the agencies going through that negotiation process, we're able to enter in different numbers for each of those targets. And as you see the little yellow and green symbols next to those blank columns, those will update as we go through this. So a yellow would mean that we are somewhat at risk accepting a lower target from an individual Michigan Works agency. A green would mean that we're on target. Everything still adds up to the state meeting its performance targets. And then what you don't see on this screen is a red symbol with an X if a proposed target would mean that the state would not meet its target proposals. So we can quickly assess within those negotiation meetings what the impact is going to be on our overall state performance to help make this process more efficient as we go through with the MWAs. So once the negotiations are complete, we at the state upload target levels to our one-stop management information system, or OSMIS. For those of you who aren't familiar, OSMIS is the sibling data collection system to the mayor's system, and this is the data collection system for Title I and Title III, along with other workforce programs. Within the OSMIS system, we provide tools to help the Michigan Works agencies track their progress throughout the program year. So as they enter participants into the OSMIS system, they can run a summary report that produces this performance matrix, and they can easily identify areas where they are currently meeting performance or where they may need to do some additional outreach to customers to help bolster those performance numbers. The example that you see here shows performance across each of our Title I programs as well as our Title III program. Has our target rates are uploaded in there, as well as our actual performance. We can run these reports. The Michigan Works agencies can run these reports either on a quarterly basis with data that we actually submit to Department of Labor, or they can also run those on demand so that they can see every day the impact that the information they enter into the system has on their performance. This is another similar type of report, just showing additional detail. We want to give the Michigan Works agencies every tool possible to help them impact their performance as they're serving customers, and make it as easy as possible to identify where they can do some additional work. So I know it's kind of small on this screen probably, but if you can see those blue hyperlinked numbers in our system, anytime a user clicks on one of those numbers, they would bring up an actual list of the customers that are included in the calculations for those performance numbers, so they can see who is impacting their performance. They can see who to follow up with to try to get more employment information, try to identify measurable skill gains that have been achieved in order to have an impact on that performance. So I mentioned earlier the statistical adjustment model. as we look at that individual performance, the two screens I showed from OSMIS, at the end of a program year, that's what we look at as our performance outcomes. But really, there's one more step before we identify what that final performance looks like. After the close of the program year, DOL adjusts our performance targets based on the characteristics of the participants that were served. So what that process looks like is at the beginning of a program year, estimated levels of performance are calculated within that statistical adjustment model. After the close of the program year, DOL will re-estimate the state's performance, and they use our actual customer data within that same tool, using the same coefficients, and they come out with an adjustment factor by subtracting the original estimate from the second estimate that was done at the end of the program year. That resulting positive or negative number or adjustment factor is added to our negotiated level of performance, and we arrive at what's called the adjusted level of performance. So kind of basically what it's telling us is that if we serve harder to serve population than what was anticipated, we would get basically a credit on our performance. So we may not have to hit the target that we negotiated. We may have to hit a lower target than that after that adjustment factor is calculated in. This is still kind of a work in progress, though, to really see what that statistical adjustment model impact is, as we've gone through several years on Title I and III side of things. And DOL runs the adjustment factors, but they're not completely comfortable with the results yet to where they publish that information universally. So we're still kind of working towards what kind of impact does that have on the state. We also have a requirement to do that at the local level, which we're hoping to pilot this year. It's a little bit challenging, and particularly with the pandemic, not really knowing how this adjustment model will impact our performance related to that. So that's a really quick overview from the Title I and III side of things. Obviously, a lot more detail into how those calculations work and things like that, but hopefully that's a little bit of a comparison that you can make between our Department of Labor programs and the adult education programs. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Erica to talk through Title II.
Great, thanks so much, Matt. That was really, I know that definitely could be a full day session. I can see that, but that's really helpful just for us to, better understand the performance of those Titles I and III. And so, as Matt said, I'm just going to kind of share a comparison of how we set the targets for the Title II. Actually, sorry, I'll be on that. And so, as many of you know, for Title II, that's administered under the U.S. Department of Education. And so we primarily work with the Division of Adult Education and Literacy within the Office of Career and Technical Education, which we generally refer to them as OCTE. So if you've seen that acronym, that's our federal office that oversees the Title II, or also known as the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, or AFLA. And so one of the key things you'll see is, while the departments at the federal level, there's a lot of coordination and collaboration, how they operate is differently. As Matt mentioned, any policy or guidance that's released from Department of Labor is issued through what's called PEOs. And the flip side, through Department of Education, we receive what's called Program Memorandum. And so this specific guidance that was released regarding negotiations and sanctions is Program Memorandum 20-2, and that was released in February of 2020. And so that's, the content is very similar, but the format that we receive that guidance is different. And so one of the key differences too, as you probably know from listening to Matt's presentation, is for Title II, those targets that we negotiate for Michigan are the same targets that each of our local programs are held to as well. And so I will just say, while it sounds great to have locally negotiated measures that are applicable to your local area, there are 16 Michigan Works, and I know that it's a lot of work, even with the 16 MWAs for Title II. We have about 98 providers that are funded, and so that would be a significant process to do that for each provider. And so the other thing that I wanted to mention is this past program year, so program year 2020-21 that we just completed and recently submitted. That was the first year that we had targets for the credential attainment and employment outcomes. So when you think back to that list of the 5 measures that Matt showed initially, when WIOA was first passed, the measurable skill gain was the only for adult education that we negotiated, because that was the only one that was pretty consistent under the previous legislation with the new. And so the others were what we call baseline measures. And so what that meant is we collected the information, we reported it, but we didn't have enough information to set targets. And so we were actually kind of the flip of Title I and Title III, whereas there was still measurable skill gain is new for them. That was kind of something that we were comfortable and had consistently been doing. So I think if I could just ask too, if everyone can double check that their lines are muted. There is some background noise, so just wanted to make sure that everyone's lines are muted. So similar to Titles I and III, for Title II, our targets are negotiated every 2 years as well, and that coincides with the years that we do submit the Unified State Plan and our 2-year modifications. So that's true across all titles. And so we last negotiated in the spring of 2020, and that was for program year 2021, which we just completed, and the current year, 2021-22. So obviously a lot has changed when we talk about the economic conditions in the current climate from when we did those negotiations to what we're currently under. But when we go through that process, we use it, those are, the basis for that is the last year of complete data that we have available. So at that time, it was the 2018-19 data, and I'll kind of share that with you. And then our next negotiation will be this coming spring. So similarly, we're working on our modifications to the Unified State Plan as we get ready to submit those, and we will propose targets that we will include in that measurement. And one thing that I think would be more helpful that I just wanted to share with you is really when we start the negotiation process, we receive a tool from OCTAE, our federal office, that they've developed that I think is awesome. And we've kind of stolen some pieces from it. And so rather than put on slides, I'm just gonna go right into it and share this with you. So hopefully everyone can see my screen here. And so when we receive this tool, so we'll get this again in spring, this upcoming spring. This is the one that we received the last negotiation process. We have the option to select our state here. So obviously this shows Michigan. And once you select your state, then this tool populates with all of your previous data. So again, this would be from 2018-19. So it breaks down all of our measurable skill gains by EFL. And then we're also, it's including all of the data that we need to go through that negotiation process. So it's our prior year's data. We also see the national averages, so similar to what Matt was sharing for Titles I and III. It's not just how we're performing in Michigan, but how does that compare to at the national level, but then also colleagues in similar states or in our region. And then here is where we look to propose our targets. So we've got our summary information of our prior year target, which at that point was 47%. Did we meet that? And then also, what I want to highlight here is, the information that Matt was referring to as well, the GEFRA target. So again, that's something that it's a measurement tool that Congress and the legislature use to evaluate federal programs. So that's something that also comes into play. OCTAE may want us to set different targets to ensure they're meeting targets as they evaluate performance and report to Congress. The statistical adjustment model estimate. So again, I'll talk about this in a little bit, but as Matt said, this is new for Title II across the board, but this information is used as we propose targets. So we do this for both the measurable skill gain, as well as here's new for our employment and outcome indicators. And so you can see there was no data on targets per se, but they do look to see how we had been performing. And this is where we'll propose what targets that we would like to first recommend. I will say our negotiation is not much of a negotiation for Title II. It's really, based on what does the data tell us. And when I say that, it's really this tab here, these quartile rankings are what's so important for us as we're setting the data, but also what I think is so interesting for us to look and really see how we compare with our colleagues across the state. And so what this shows us, and we get this information again every 2 years, and we really value it, it breaks across each section here is each performance measure. So here, this first section is for adult basic education measurable skill gains, ESL measurable skill gains, and then our overall MSG. And there's a ranking of all of the states and US territories that are funded under AFLA. And so it breaks those out into 4 quartiles. So at the bottom in red is the lowest performing states and territories. In yellow is the second quartile. What we see in purple here is the median. So this is the average for all states and territories. And then in green is the third quartile, and the orange are the top performing. This purple band represents the 5% deviation from that median. And so the guidance that we've always been given from our federal level is to look at where did we perform before, how does that compare with other states and similar states within our region, and then proposing targets that show continuous improvement. So that may not necessarily just always be, upping the percentage, but what they may say is if you're in the bottom, we have to propose a target that would push you into that next quartile. If you're, say for example, in the second quartile, but below the median average, you have to propose a target that pushes you above the national median. And then again, if you're in this third quartile, proposing a target that pushes you into that top. And then I think when you get into, where you're performing up here, you're just, maintaining if you're one of the top performing states. For Michigan, I will say, if you were to look, we are in each of these measures, we're above the national, the median. And so that's a great thing. We've seen tremendous growth, since the implementation of WIOA with our ABE, measurable skill gain. And again, this is because those individuals, it's not just based on a pre and a post test, but if they earn a high school diploma or equivalency, that's included as a measurable skill gain. And so that's been a tremendous asset. We know many of our students, they earn that credential, but getting them back in for that post test was always a challenge. Now that's meeting performance. And so as you can see here for Michigan, we're at 49.4% for our ABE. ESL, we're consistently across the top. We're at 53%, just above that purple band for our overall MSG. So we're consistently performing well. When we get into the employment targets, still in the green, for each of these areas. So when we look at how we perform, that's what we're doing well. But it is eye-opening when we look at the performance targets for many of our, Title II providers is in the 40s and 50s in compared to Michigan's targets for Title I and III that were 80 and up to 88%. That's a significant difference. And then the median earnings, you can see that there's a strong variance. And again, this is new information that we were just starting to collect. But I think too, when you look at this, it also can tell you, obviously, when you look at some of these states that have the highest median earnings, District of Columbia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, these are some of your states where, the cost of living and the wages are generally higher. So taking that into account, knowing that you're not going to be compared to a state like that. And then credential attainment rate. And so I just wanted, to show this information because this is really when we look at, I know there are questions about how we set the targets and what data that's based on. And so it really is, there's a lot of information that's taken into account. But it's great data to go through to really understand where we sit in comparison with other states. So I just wanted to share that, and now I'll jump back over to the presentation. So again, as I showed on that spreadsheet, there really are a number of factors that our federal office wants us to, to be thinking about as we're proposing targets and we're looking at the measurements, but making sure it's, the optimal return and investment on those federal funds. And continuous improvement is something that we hear over and over again. So that may be, increasing from where we had previously been. And I would say if you looked at those targets, we've made some pretty significant jumps in the targets that we've had over the last 5 years, when we were in the low 40s and now into the 50s, but it's because of the performance that we've had. And so again, having to have a target that keeps us moving forward and isn't below where we're already performing. But again, one of the things, that is taken into account, if there's changes in, your strategies or your delivery, then that's something that they'll look at too. So, as we try to increase, for example, IET programs or the integration of workforce training, then looking at, are those individuals, more likely to be employed? And we have seen that with our IET participants. So the impact that can have on our performance. So as we talked about, the statistical adjustment model is new for Title II. And so that's something that when we look at the guidance that they've shared, there's 2 ways that they'll be using that. And the first is, accounting for the impact of the characteristics and the economic conditions in the state when we're setting and proposing our targets. So they've given us information and a tool that we put those targets in. And then on the back side, once we submit our performance, then they would take that and adjust that based on the actual participants that we serve. And this is where we're so excited about the improvements we've made in the collection of those barriers to employment. So when you're asking your students, when they're coming into your program about any of those barriers, that's really the information that goes into that statistical adjustment model. So based on the actual participants that we're serving in our program, then our performance is adjusted accordingly. So like Matt was saying, if you are serving a population that is harder to serve, then your performance, can be adjusted accordingly. So we haven't actually gone through, the process yet. This will be the first year of having that data adjusted based on this. So we're not sure what exactly that will look like. But so more information to come, but it's something that we're definitely keeping an eye on, but are really encouraged based on the progress that we've made with getting that barriers to information collected. And so I just wanted to share the targets that we have for the current year. And obviously these were the 2-year cycle. So we do, while overall measurable skill gain is the only true performance measure that you see like on your statewide performance report or your performance summary report or any of the NRS tables, it's really calculated and proposed based on breaking out the 2 groups for ABE as well as ESL. And as I was showing you on that spreadsheet, it does break it out by each ESL. So we propose targets for each one, and then those are, it's not just a straight average, it's weighted based on the participants that we serve in each EFL. So that is adjusted accordingly. And so we have the percentage for each that we track and share with programs. And then here are the employment targets that we've set. And again, very interested to see the first couple of years, the national median averages for within Title II, especially for the employment information was quite low. Not all states have data match. And so I think that we are well positioned in Michigan, that we do have the ability to data match with unemployment insurance records. So if you collect a social security number or a participant provides that information, then we can do that match automatically and don't have to rely on the survey data. So not all states have that ability. And especially when we talk about the median earnings too, we know that students and really anyone doesn't always like to share information about their wages. And so being able to use data match for these employment indicators has been a tremendous benefit for us. And so again, here's the targets for Title II, and this information can always be found. We load it into MERS. So it's on any of your reports as you're running your performance reports. So specifically your performance summary report and an EFL performance snapshot will have the comparison to those state benchmarks, and you can run those at any time to see how your program is comparing. And we do have links as well, as Matt was showing in OSMIS that they have, so you can go right to see which participants have met the performance measure and which have not yet. So if you need to make sure your data is up to date. And these targets are also available on the adult education website. So if you needed access to those. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sue Johnson, and we just wanted to spend a few minutes to share about how performance is actually calculated and how our students can be included in that. So Sue?
Thanks, Erica. So anybody who's been to any of my trainings, this should look very familiar. So this is a performance tool that goes over the various performance measures and how someone falls into that category. And I usually take a stack of them to every training session and touch on it a little bit. And it's pretty busy. It is a one-sheet cheat sheet that we have, but I'm just going to touch on the highlighted blue section, and then on the right, the green highlighted section. So for Title II, we have 5 measurable skill gains that can be achieved within a year. And we're looking for a participant to hit 1 or more of these. And our goal this year is 51% for Title II. And so of those 5, we have the basic pre to post test for assessments, which now we have data matching for assessments, which is awesome. If someone earns their secondary credential through the high school equivalency, which Michigan accepts GED and HiSET, or they earn their diploma, or someone who is in the high school completion program, the year they move from that 9th, 10th grade level, which is EFL level 5, to the 11th, 12th grade level, which is the EFL level 6, that's considered a measurable skill gain. Or if someone exits the program and then enrolls in post-secondary education on or before June 30th, that's a measurable skill gain. And there's some bullet points underneath each one in that blue section that highlights how someone could be counted into that particular measure. And then on the green side, we have those outcome measures. So this past year was our first year to do follow-up and have those measures count toward our new requirements. And so we have a few ways for the outcome measures. And again, with data matching with wages, that really helps greatly. So our employment measures are the percentage employed second quarter after exit, and we capture the median earnings for that. And then those who are employed fourth quarter after exit. 100% of our participants with 12 or more hours do require follow-up in those categories. And then the last 3 are our educational follow-up. So it's all about the credential attainment. So anybody who earns that GED, HiSET, or their high school diploma, and then they either are entering employment or enrolling in post-secondary education within a year after exit. And then the final one is the post-secondary credential for those participants who are in a post-secondary integrated and educational training program. If they earn their credential within a year after exit, that is also an outcome performance measure. So, and we do have tools in MERS where you could pull a follow-up report. It tells you who you need to do follow-up on, who has been data matched. So really utilize those tools a lot. So back to you, Erica.
All right, thanks, Sue. And that really is everything that we have that we wanted to share with you. So I hope that this was helpful for you to understand not only the performance measures, but also how those targets are calculated and determined, and how not only it can benefit your program, but also in how you partner with other agencies. And so, Maha, were there questions? We're happy to take any questions that people may have.
Yes, the questions are just in the Zoom chat. There's nothing in the HOVA chat. So the first question was from Elizabeth Roman. She said about the numbers, about other states. She said she likes the numbers, but she said, how does the district predict the target numbers that they should enroll? That's the first question.
Yeah, that's a good question. And so I think if I'm understanding correctly on the targets, when we set those with Department of Education, they have identified a percentage, but then also a number. So I'm assuming that that may be the question. What we were told, and as of right now, they really just look at that percentage of participants that meet the measure. So we haven't been held to the specific number that's proposed in there.
And then the second question was from Mary Beth about the youth program at Michigan Works. And she said, you know, it's great, it assists them get their GED. But the question is, when they complete their GED credential, it doesn't count as an MSG. These are participants that are not attending the Adult Ed Center. Will that change? Will this change?
I think that question is probably for me. Secondary diplomas and their equivalent are eligible for measurable skill gains. So I guess I would like to know more about the details of a participant, a specific participant that we might be able to look at. I'm going to drop our general help desk email address in the chat for the workforce side of things, or Title I and Title III side of things. And if you can send me some more details about a specific youth that you're looking at or something like that, we can dig into that to see whether that's a training issue with Michigan Works, or whether that's there's some other things going on that might be limiting that that ability to get that gain.
Okay, thank you.
So much. Thank you. And then the next question is from Carol. She said, does entering armed forces count as PSE?
So entering the armed forces would not be considered post-secondary education, but it would be considered employment. So generally that's where someone that that is serving in the military would be counted for performance.
Thank you. And then Catherine is asking, does anybody ever have students that move up to EFL 6?
Mhm.
She said their GED passers are usually in EFL 4 or 5. I think that's more question for the attendees. And then
if I can just say on that, Maha, I think that we would see it more with those that are working on a high school diploma, that they would have that ability based on credits, then they could move. So if they have 50% or more of the credits needed, then that can be counted as, you know, an EFL 6. Or Sue, I don't know if you wanted to add anything there.
No, that's about right. It's normally just your diploma people that are going to be
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And I think it also depends on what you're testing with. If it's TABE or CASAS, we found TABE, it tends to be a little bit lower. CASAS seems to be just slightly higher.
Thank you both. And then Chad is asking, she said he knows, I know I have this document buried somewhere, but is it on the state adult ed website? Is that, Erica, is it on the website?
It is on the mayor's page of the adult education website. Are you talking about the performance tool?
I don't know, Chad, maybe if you want to clarify that, because I wasn't sure what document he's talking about.
Yeah, I was typing it as Sue was talking about it. But I
Okay.
something else.
And Chad, I just
yeah, that's what I was
assumed.
talking about. And then I noticed she put it in the chat too, that it is on the mayor's.
Yep.
I know I have it somewhere. I just
Everybody should have it. If you've been to my trainings, you have it. But yeah, you can even, if you have access to mayor's, go through the special functions tab down to the help info link, and it's all attached. You can get right to the website through there as well.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. We have some time for more questions. Bonnie's asking, just to confirm, the median earnings is captured during second quarter, not fourth?
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Sue.
I was gonna say, it's the requirement for our performance measure is second quarter after exit. However, just to keep the system consistent and not knowing if it would ever be asked in the future, we capture it in both second, fourth, and actually we capture it in first and third as well.
Thank you so much. So I checked both chats. There are no more questions. I know Matt, you left, he left the email address here. If you have any questions, he said, please submit them. He said, it's in the chat if you want to copy that email address and then save it somewhere. And then I just want to let you know for the, for Sue, Erica, and Matt, we had over 100 attendees earlier, but they jump on and off. So that was a, I think, Sue, you broke the record, I have to say. I don't think anybody. So, but thank you so much. Any other questions? Does anybody have any other questions before we say our closing statement? Let's see, somebody's actually asking a question here. Just a second, Erica, in the chat, please. In the HOVA chat, there's a question. So the question, I'm just going to read it as I'm reading it. I'm going to read it out loud. This is from Jennifer. She said, if a participant is enrolled in 2 adult ed provider programs at once, can their instructional hours be entered as a whole instead of separated into hours completed at each agency? And then she said, for example, if a participant completes 4 hours at my agency in a month and then 8 hours at another agency, can we both enter 12 hours for that month?
Sue, I'm going to defer to you.
Oh, Erica, I was.
Were you deferring to me?
Because system-wise, mayors will let you. Policy-wise, I don't know if that's what you'd like to see. Currently, we say if you're going to put in the hours that you're serving, that you're expending your time and funding on. But that's, I guess that's more policy.
Yeah, and I think that may be a question that we could have a little bit more discussion on to make sure that we understand the situation and how the 2 partners are working together. But yeah, I think that there's a possibility. I'm assuming the question is, you know, more for students that don't have enough hours in each of the registrations separately to take a post-test, that maybe you'd need the combined hours in order for them to reach those hours. And so that would be something, you know, that we could discuss more. But like Sue's saying, you know, usually it's what you serve in the program, but as well, you know, depending on if they're enrolled in other classes or programs, you know, such as, you know, for the special programs or IET, then those hours do count. And so I think that we just need some more conversation separately to better understand that situation.
Excellent. I think this is it. These are all the questions. I want to thank each and every one of you, Sue, Erica, and Matt. Thank you so much for this excellent session, for a lot of the information. I know, Sue, that sheet that you just showed, I saw that one time when I first heard the adult edit, I'm like, whoa, it's a lot of information. But I think you also know if you have any questions, they left their contact information, feel free to reach to that. But thanks to everyone that attended today. Please don't forget, at the end of each session, if you can go back to your agenda and then rate the session, that really helps in all the conferences. If you can go back for feedback as a training tool for the next time we plan those conferences. So this is something that's added now. Agenda, rate the session, please. If you may just take that one moment. Sketches will be there tomorrow. Join us tonight. I mean, the same sales pitch that we're doing over and over again. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Maha.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye, you guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.